Hello there, my name is Kerswell, and in this video I want to go through how we can increase collaboration, specifically when we're working on databases. So how do we make database development more efficient? How do we work more efficiently, I guess, as a team? Alright, so why is this important? Well, there's a few reasons. First and foremost, there's a lot of changes that have happened in the world, especially over the last year or so. Even that put aside, over the last, I would say, 5-10 years especially, this idea of a distributed workforce is one that's definitely been growing. Generally, we're seeing the development teams are a lot more diverse. That means that they are incorporating a lot of different geographies, but also the actual individuals being involved are of different roles. So for example, with the idea of DevOps, incorporating DevOps, there's a specific function of that, which is taking operations teams and actually directly intermingling them with developers. That principle, I guess, means that we're going to have to communicate with people who we might not be used to communicating with. So how do we do that more effectively? How do we collaborate with those individuals? Furthermore, as is always the case, I think in IT, we're constantly being expected to do more with less. So this is something that isn't new, I guess, to a lot of people, especially if you're in operations. I think a lot of DBAs will sit there and nod their heads at the idea that they have to look at more environments, they have to essentially manage more, but the size of the DBA team very rarely scales with that. And that's also true for development. We essentially want to produce more, but we don't want to increase the size of our development team tenfold. So how do we do that? We want to make development work a lot more efficient. And I think both of these are especially pertinent when it comes to the database. So there are a lot of modern development methodologies, especially within the sphere of DevOps, that really helps you out when it comes to working with code. But we often find that the database is definitely lagging behind. A lot of those principles are a lot harder to apply to databases. There's a lot of different reasons for that. One, of course, is that databases by nature are a lot more clunky. They aren't really things you can source control all that easily. Simply taking a database and putting it in source control means you need some kind of mechanism to do that. You can't simply put the actual files, the MDF and LDF files, in source control. You just end up bloating your repository. Another piece is the actual data that's involved. That is often quite valuable and we don't want to lose it, which means we can often, I guess, put kid gloves on when we're looking to deploy to production, because we don't want production to fall over. It makes sense, it's not wrong, but at the same time that does mean that it's harder to implement, say, an automated workflow with that in mind. So our solution to this from Redgate as a whole is to think about the idea of bringing DevOps to the database. There's a lot of different facets to that, but I'm going to focus on just one, and that's this standardization piece. And in this video, I want to look at how we can bring in collaboration and efficient coding practices to alleviate some of these concerns. So the first, and this is probably something that a lot of you guys watching are familiar with, is the idea of standardizing coding styles. So we'll take a look a little bit later as to what I actually mean by this, and we'll go through a live video. But essentially, we're talking about taking coding practices, especially best practices, and making sure that they are unified across our teams. SQL Prompt is the best thing I think we produce from a lot of people's perspectives. It's by far Redgate's most popular tool, and that really enables this. And I'm going to show you some tips and tricks around that. But we can go further with this, and this is something that we at Redgate feel quite strongly about. Our vision in this space is to really make sure that the developers are able to work as efficiently as possible. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. For example, if you are an individual, you probably don't want your own time wasted. If you're a manager, you want your team producing as much as they possibly can, so you want them to be effectively working as much as possible, in uptime as much as possible. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, a big facet of this is how we can adopt version control. And so implementing a version control system for the database can essentially enable us to much more efficiently work as a team. We can then share our code around. We can even start thinking about dedicated development environments. Again, this is something I'm going to show you in a little bit of detail as well, how we can actually take the idea of a development database and instead of sharing one central database, actually enable multiple developers to be working off their individual databases. This is really handy if we want to avoid, for example, accidental overwrites, which is when people might be modifying the same objects at once and not realize that they are executing changes over the top. If we want to think about how this fits into a wider DevOps practice, I often think about this as the foundational step. Not always true though. There are other places you might also want to focus on. So the idea of bringing in, say, CI/CD or automated deployment practices, the idea of unlocking what actually goes on in the database, the work that the database is doing through metric analysis, through monitoring, or the provisioning process, taking a copy of production and giving those copies to development or testers. All right, so let's focus on that first element, the idea of source controlling and working with the database as efficiently as possible. I want to show you what that looks like. So jumping in here, I have a few databases already set up. So that's these Simple Talk development databases. Now in this case, I've got two developers who are already established. We have Kathy and Steve. I'm going to make some changes in this Kathy database and show you how we can use those platforms, so the source control platform, as well as using some of our tools like SQL Prompt to efficiently and collaboratively work on that database. All right, so right here we have a few tables, we have some stored procedures already. I'm going to write in a new store procedure. So I'm just going to write a query for this. So usually that would be create procedure, as I'm sure you all know. Instead of writing all of those keystrokes though, I'm going to do something else. So this is something that users of SQL Prompt will be familiar with. We call this code snippets. And it basically means that you align a whole block of code, if I get rid of this and do that again, with a simple string. In this case, CP. So CP, create procedure. All I'm typing here, CP and then enter. And then I've got that block of code to use. And then I can type out, say, new store procedure, new proc. Not a very good name for a store procedure. I'll then, in this case, all I'm going to do is select everything from my context table. So SSF was another snippet I used there in order to do that. Select star from, just making my typing, my coding a little bit more efficient by removing some of those keystrokes. So code snippets, really handy. If I go down to my snippet manager in my prompt menu, I can edit that. So here I can edit those code snippets. For example, if I want to modify what actually happens, then I can edit the code snippet and change what the snippet actually maps to. Here we have, for example, some custom ones I've created. So this is useful for our demo environment. The amalgamation of these things, very handy. We have a huge amount of very smart guys and girls who have effectively figured out how to really get the best out of this and really efficiently code effectively using this. I think it becomes quite addictive once you get into it. But what's really nice here and how we can use this to collaborate is we can share this around. So you see up here we have this snippet folder. That snippet folder could very easily be a shared drive. That means that you can share the code snippets around. And so for example here I have these code snippets that we use for our demo environments. Well, we can put them on a shared folder and that means the team can use them when they need them. Alright, let's go back to the stored procedure. One thing you might have noticed is that we have some underlining here. For example, if I hover over, you can see that the tooltip tells me the parameter is declared but never used. So that again is SQL Prompt. That's something that we call code analysis. This is all manageable up here in the prompt menu. So we can again jump in and change some of this. I might, for example, say, okay, I'm going to disable some of the rules I don't personally agree with. And once again, we have the settings file that can be shared around and again put in a shared drive. So in this case, I declare that parameter, I never use it, let's get rid of it. Select star from, that star. Well, I can see the exact reasons why this has been highlighted right here. In this case, it's to do with the actual performance of the query. So maybe I should be a bit more precise. And in this case, I can actually fix this very easily. So if I put my cursor in the right place, hit tab, then you can expand that out and actually I can specify exactly what I want. Or maybe I want to add some of those back in. So I'm going to grab some of those columns, drop them back in, and there we go. We've now got select specific items from that contacts table. Nice and easy, but this now looks a bit rubbish. So I'm going to hold Control, hit KY, reformat the code, and what that does is realign it in the way I desire. And I really do mean the way I desire, because I can use SQL Prompt's actual styles to format it into specific styles. For example, if you're one of those people who wants commas at the start of the sentence, you know who you are. We have the option to change that style, and with that hotkey press, Control KY, you can very quickly reformat that code the way you like it. Again, coming on to the theme of collaboration, that means that you can take someone else's code, format it into the way you want to work, do your work, and then format it back. And these are highly configurable and customizable, so we have the options here to change all of that if we need to. So if I go to Edit Styles, we can see that. And once again, we have a style folder here that we can share around. We do in fact have customers who will basically use that to maintain corporate styles or team styles. They'll share that around. You can work in the style you want to, but when you actually want to commit that code, then you go back into, say, the corporate style. Let's go with the collapse style. Let's see. Hit the hotkey, Control KY, and then, okay, I'll actually execute that query now. Again, in this case, I'm working in quite a simple example, but this works just as well on those large stored procedures or other bits of code. SQL Prompt, great tool, really helps with the collaboration. But we can go a step further and we can start to introduce source control into the mix as well. And that means that we can, again, work more efficiently as a team. We can now share our code around, and that enables us to work in a dedicated environment. Okay, so I'm going to do that by opening SQL Source Control. This is a plugin for SSMS, and what it enables me to do is to take basically my database and translate it into code. So this database right here, this is a working folder. So I'm working with a Git repository. I've got a remote repository, a local repository, and this is the working folder. And all of this code right here, there is a one-to-one mapping between my objects in the database and then the actual code that's written here. For example, here I have my contacts table. So this contacts table has been effectively scripted as a create. You can see the actual columns in play here as well. So the plugin has generated all of this code for me, and that enables me to easily source control my database. Alright then, so I've made a couple of changes. I'm going to go to this commit tab right here. You can also get to the same place by right-clicking on your database, and you've got this handy option in your context menu. What that's going to do is it's going to look at my database, it's going to look at my source control repository, that working folder, and it's going to highlight the differences. So here I've got that stored procedure. That stored procedure is one that is brand new. Everything's highlighted as a result. Or I've got a contacts table. So that contacts table I just showed you, I have in fact modified that by adding in a new column. So we've now got a Twitter column. And so we have this side-by-side view. We can see exactly what's different, and that's highlighted for me. I'm then going to select those and say, okay, I want to check these in. Hopefully you use a much more informative commit message right there. I'm then going to hit commit. The plugin again is going to manage that. It's going to update the scripts. So if we have a look, you can see that that was refreshed today. Notepad++ usefully telling me this has been changed. If I hit yes, you can see that the Twitter column's now been added in. So that enables you to very easily manage your database objects and get that code in source control. What that means is that we can very easily share that around. So a quick aside here, I'm using Git, and we've got a local and a remote. So in this case, I need to also run the push. Okay, let's say then that my other developer, that's Steve, wants to come in and hit get latest. Now, Steve is working on his own local repository. So first of all, going to run a pull. That's going to pull all the changes down. And as expected, you can see that we have that contacts table change and that new stored procedure. So let's have a look just to validate before we do this. Contacts table doesn't have that Twitter column at the moment. But if I hit apply changes, what the plugin's going to do is take that code, run it against my local database. Let's have another look. And now we have a Twitter column right there as we'd expect. Okay, so that means that we can much more effectively collaborate as a team. Let's say, for example, that we have a new developer that joins the team. Let's say it's Chris, and so I want to give Chris a new database, a new copy of the project, so he can effectively work from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to link it to the same source control repository that we're using. In this case, I'm going to be a little bit lazy and I'm just going to use the same working folder. In reality, you would almost certainly give Chris his own local repository. We're going to start by going to the Setup tab and go through the wizard here. So we have a variety of options to use here. We don't just have to use Git, but I quite like Git, so let's stick with Git. This could also be hosted in Azure DevOps. So I'm going to hit link, and that's going to do just that. It will link the database to the repository. That now means that the plugin has that link between the two. Once again, I'm going to go to the Get Latest tab. Now this time you can see that we have a whole bunch of objects here, huge amount more than before, as expected. So I'm going to hit my my Apply Changes button and effectively take all that code and recreate a copy of that database. So it's very easy for a team to scale up. We can add new developers into such a system. We can bring people in. We can share our changes around very easily. We've also got a very nice view of the history of changes. So we've got this option in the right-click menu. Now you can see here, check these in. That was my rubbish comment I just made. You can see the actual code and the objects that I've modified here. Again, one by one, and you can see the changes themselves and manage that effectively. That effectively gives Chris then a schema copy of the database. So if I have a look at my contacts table, for example, we're going to see an empty table. One of the nice features about SQL Source Control, something that is really powerful, is that we can also add some data to our source control program. We probably don't want to add every single table because having a lot of data in source control is going to really defeat the purpose of source control. But if it's work done by developers, therefore it is stuff that you want to capture in source control. So if I run the select statement over my country codes table, we actually do have data. The reason being that this table is one that is managed by developers. The data inside, modifications to it, is all work done by development teams. And so as a result, we have linked that using this option right here. So we refer to this as static data. That country codes table is a great example of that because it's lookup data. The RSS feeds table, another good example of that, that's actually config data. But the rest is going to be completely empty. Now this isn't just for using dedicated environments. We also have some nice features around enabling teams to work more efficiently if they're using a shared database environment. For example, if we take one of these objects, like my contacts table, I can apply a lock to this object, and that's going to mean that no one else can come in and modify that object. If they do, the actual save will get interrupted by a trigger. Okay, so that's some of the options you have when using SQL Source Control. That's hopefully given you a great overview of the SQL Source Control tool. SQL Prompt, SQL Source Control, they're all part of our SQL Toolbelt and SQL Toolbelt Essentials package. Really handy when it comes to enabling development teams to work in an efficient and standardized way. As I said earlier, I tend to think of it as the foundation for implementing a DevOps program. Standardize the way that your developers are working with the database before building on top of that with, say, automation. So there's a lot of tools that form part of that tool belt. There's a lot of value there, but SQL Prompt, SQL Source Control are definitely the places I begin with. If you've got any questions about any of the things that you've seen in this video, please feel free to reach out to us. You can always contact me through either LinkedIn or through my email address, which is right there. Alternatively, leave a comment below, or try the website at red-gate.com. I hope you found that useful. All the best.